בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. Our hero for today, Rav Yosef, we call it Kapach, that's the way that it's pronounced here in Israel. It seems that the right way to pronounce it is the kuf in the Yemenite accent is more like a gimel, it would be gabiach, but I would not even try it, so for the rest of the shiur, it would be Rav Yosef Kapach. Rav Yosef Kapach is a very unique and interesting figure, a leader of the Yemenite Jews here in Israel. His grandfather was also a very important rabbi back in Yemen. We spoke about him about a year ago. And so he is coming from an important family of Rabbanim and Dayanim in Yemen, in Sana'a, that is Yemen capital. So his grandfather, Rav Yechia Kapach, if you remember, he is leading what is called the Dardeim. Dardeim is Dor De'ah, meaning generation of intellect, of thinking. And that is because his grandfather was very much into rational Jewish philosophy. So Rav Saadia Gaon, Rambam, and he objected the entrance of Kabbalah into the Minhagim and the Halacha in Yemen. That was his grandfather. And this grandfather had a son named Rav David Kapach. Rav David was a menahel of what we would call today a school. They called it Maknas, I think. But that's me, a cheder in Europe. It's just different names for the same institution. So an elementary school for boys for the teaching of Torah. And however, around his grandfather, there developed a very, unfortunately, a very intensive dispute, a machloket, and a very bad one. And it came to the level that the people that were against his grandfather were speaking to the government, telling them that his grandfather is trying to rebel against them, that he is rebelling against religion because against Kabbalah, and that as you can imagine, I mean, Jews are Jews, whatever, if they are in Poland or in Yemen or whatever, wherever they are, it's just the same, I guess, DNA. And Korach, he was in Midbar Sinai, and from there on, we are just repeating the same scene, I guess, until we'd be able to figure it right. And what happened there was that his father, as part of these libels, his father was arrested, and while he was arrested, he was tortured to death. So he was beat. Now, it doesn't necessarily that the Jewish enemies of his grandfather and his father wanted his father to die. That is not necessarily what they hoped. Maybe they just hoped to close the school that he was running. But when you get the non-Jews to intervene, then you can never know where it would stop. So it's very easy to go and to blame, to go and to tell, to go and to be what we call in the language of halacha, it's called being moser, being telling about someone to the non-Jewish power. But you can only know how do you begin, and you can never know how it would end. And that's what happened there. So his father died when he was 5 years old. 5 years old. Excuse me, when he was 1 year old. He became also orphaned from his mother when he was 5 years old. Yeah, that was the situation. So he grew up and was educated by his grandfather. He was very much close to him. He was teaching him how to write in very beautiful scribe method of how to write, like Sofer Stam. And Rav Yosef Kapach told many years later that his grandfather believed that the child should learn how to write. So nowadays, when we give them things to write, so it's, in Hebrew, it's Dana Nama, Dana Kama, Dana Shara, Shir Sameach, which is, it's cute, it's nice. But his father believed that when you teach someone to write, even if he cannot understand, you should already give them to copy from the Tanakh, from Rambam. So they should immediately train themselves in the best texts that we have as a culture. So Rav Yosef Qafih, as a 5, 6, 7 years old boy, he was already copying very complicated and interesting texts. Obviously, he wasn't really able to understand Moreh Nevuchim, right, the guide for the perplexed of Maimonides, of Rambam, when he was 6 years old. But he said, my grandfather believed that something would seep in. And he says, he writes that many years later, he writes, I believe that he was right. Also, his grandfather was very much into collecting and saving old manuscripts of Jewish Sepharim, of Jewish religious texts. And he would take, because young Yosef Qafih was only 6 or 7 years old, and he was very thin, then he would be able to go into rooms of Geniza that you cannot enter, and he would push young Yosef through the window in order to search, and that way they saved a few manuscripts that later Rav Yosef Qafih would publish, and without them we would not have them. Extremely important Sfarim that we have only because of this Mesirut Nefesh, this willing really to make the effort and save these manuscripts. So some of these manuscripts were not Yemenite in origin. They were from Spain, they were from Ashkenaz. However, in the other places they fell out of use, and because there was not such a zeal for saving the old manuscripts, they were not kept. But in Yemen, because they were so strong-minded about keeping every remnant of Jewishness that they could put their hands on, then these manuscripts, some of them of Rabbeinu Tam from Ashkenaz, some of them of the Ritva from Spain, some of them of the Rived from Provence, so from all over the world, and you have only manuscripts kept in Yemen, which is very interesting, and many of them found their way in the end into the hands of Rav Yechia Qafih and his grandson, Rav Yosef Qafih. While he is learning how to read these manuscripts and how to copy them, and of course to understand them, also his grandfather, following Rambam, does not believe that one should earn his money from being a rabbi, from teaching or learning Torah. So he said, you need also to learn some art, something that you would be able later to pursue in order to make a living. So he taught him how to become tzoref. Tzoref is someone, goldsmith, that produces jewelry. So that was very ancient Jewish Yemenite art, and there were many traditions, and Rav Qafih was also a heir to these different traditions. Also, in order just to be able to work in different environments, he also learned nagarut. Nagarut is carpentry, and napachut. Napachut in metal, working with metal. No, it's in metal. That's blacksmithing, maybe. Okay, so when was all of this? Excellent. So you are right. I should have began. He was born in Yudbet Bekislev, Taf Reish Ayin Chet, which is 1917. 1917. He was orphaned from his father in 1918 and orphaned from his mother in 1922. In 1931, when he was 14, his grandfather passed away, which, his father passed away when he was 1 year old. Obviously, he didn't understand what is going on. His mother passed away when he was 5 years old, also very young boy. But when his grandfather passed away, that's when he really felt, because this was the man that really raised him. So he really felt that he's bereft, that the pillar of his existence was taken from beneath his feet. And so that happened in 1931. And young Yosef, 14 years old, he felt so close to his grandfather that he said Shiva. Usually grandchildren do not sit Shiva, but he said Shiva for his grandfather because really he was his father for almost all purposes. However, he was such a genius that in the age of 14, he replaces his grandfather in giving the shiurim in his grandfather's Beit Midrash. He was extremely talented. But the difficulties did not stop there, because in 1933, also as part of closing of סגירת חשבונות, it's not closing of accounts, how do you say, taking revenge and part of the blood circle. So again, there was telling about him to the government, what he was told, what were they told. So in Yemen, they had a law about orphans. If you were an orphan, then you must go to the state orphan house. But this orphanage of the state obviously was Muslim. So if you go there, you must take upon yourself the Muslim religion. Now, that was, of course, all of that done for the good and the sake of the young orphans. But that was the law of the state. And because he was less than 18, so he was considered an orphan, and the government were notified that he needs to be sent into an orphanage house. And the only way to save him was to get married. That's right, to get married. And so, in the age of 16, he was married to his niece. Nephew, niece? The niece. Okay. Yeah, niece. Bat Dodo. Yeah, so that's a niece. Her name, so that's a cousin. So a cousin. Her name was Bracha Qafih. She was 11. But as you understand, they were not immediately married and began to live together. But it was a ceremonial marriage, and the couple got slowly to know each other, really to grow up together. And only later, that it's practically the marriage took place. Now, she became very famous by her own name because she won a part of him. He won Pras Israel, the Israel Prize, we would speak about it later, but she also won Pras Israel, and that is because of her mif'alei chesed. She was a great doing of charity, and she had in a house, now of course I'm jumping many years ahead, not when she was 11, but many years later in Yerushalayim, almost the whole of their house was dedicated for clothes and other products that she held in her house for the sake of poor people, and everyone that needed a shirt, blouse, everything that you knew that you can go to her and she would have different sizes and you can take for free. And many people, of course, use it, and that's she got Pras Israel for these activities of her. So she was a great woman by her own sake. And they got married. In 1934, he finishes his first sefer, to write his first sefer. He's 17. Now, the book was called Sichat Dekalim. That is speaking between trees. What really it was about, it was to refute the objections that a certain Italian rabbi named Shmuel David Luzzatto, known as Shadal. So he wrote objections on the Rambam's philosophy. And young Rav Yosef Qafih wrote answers on these objections. He never published the book. It remained in manuscript and was published only after his death. It was found after his passing and was published later. And it seems we cannot know for sure, but it seems the reason that he didn't publish it is because he took a decision that he doesn't want to continue the dispute that swallowed his early life and his grandfather and his father. He was not interested in being engulfed in this machloket. And so he decided that he would not comment about the question of Kabbalah, of Zohar, of the questions of halachot that entered from the Kabbalah into Jewish law. He had his own minhagim and his own halachot, but he refused to become part of this machloket. For the rest of his life, he would run away. Now, many people are very disappointed because this group that was called the Dordeim, the students of his grandfather, they expected this grandson, who was a great genius, to lead them and to continue the stand of his grandfather. But he said, I am not interested in continuing the machloket, not because I accepted the other side's position, but because I don't think that the machloket is worth the damage that it is causing. Now, I think that's really a greatness of in the age of 17, after your father was killed in such a way, to be able to say, I'm looking again, and I decide that it doesn't worth the pain and the damage, and instead, what we should do, and that's what he writes, what we should do, we need to hold hands together against secularization, against the temptations of the modern life. And if we would continue our own internal fighting, the only thing that we do by that is we are weakening the state of Torah observance, and we are letting the spirits of everything that is foreign to holiness to go into the camp. So sometimes it's better to put the weapons aside in order to be able to face the real challenge that we are facing. Which, it's so simple what I just said, but maybe not so surprisingly, it seems that many of us are unable to just look at the newspapers, unable to put internal disputes aside, even when the enemy, not literally, but really, not symbolically, not figuratively, literally, is on the gates. Well, I think that's a real greatness. So it's as part of this trying to get away from this machloket, a few years later, in 1943, he decides that he would make Aliyah, because in Sana, it was very difficult to keep himself out. All the two camps were very much alive, and he decided that he wants to make Aliyah, and he already has, in 1943, so he's 26. He has 3 children, from 7 to 1 year old. And also he's taking with him to Eretz Israel his grandmother, who raised him like a son. So they are making Aliyah. Of course, no planes from Yemen to British Palestine. They have to go by foot all the way from Yemen to Eretz Israel. And it's a very, very difficult journey. It's very hot. They were not, they were city dwellers. They were not trained to take such a walk, and his grandmother was not a young woman. And as I said, they carried a baby which was about 1 year old. Unfortunately, during these 3 months of journey, both the grandmother and his young son passed away because of the difficulty of the journey. In a small group, not a very big one. Maybe with another family, but not something that is very, very big. Not one of the big aliyot that we speak about. Just a private journey. He wrote. It's very interesting. He wrote a memoir of this journey, but he skips both the death of his grandmother and the death of his young son. So it's a very interesting read. I read that. I was looking for the paragraphs about, but it doesn't include them. I know that because I know that he lost them in the way, that they passed away in the way, because there was a biography. His granddaughter named Avivit Levi. She is a very impressive woman. She has a doctorate in computers. She's a leading scientist in computers, but she's writing poems. And she also wrote a biography of her grandfather. A very interesting woman. And she, in this biography, I read that she writes that he lost a son and his grandmother on the way, but he decided not to include it in his account of the journey. I guess that he tried to make it more positive, maybe to convince others to make Aliyah. I don't know what the reason was. He didn't want to dwell on these sad parts. However, he paid the high price for making Aliyah. So in the end of 1943, he comes to Eretz Israel, and in the beginning, he goes to live in Tel Aviv. And he was shocked. He came from Yemen, an extremely conservative community. Meaning, the word conservative is not enough, I think, to describe. We're speaking about a community that almost didn't change in 1,000 years. And that was their pride, that they changed nothing. And he comes to Tel Aviv, and it's Tel Aviv. It's a secular city. Now there was a few Hasiduyot there, also there were a few Yemenite Jews there, but it was very, very far from anything he had known in Yemen. And he writes, I would like to read with you something that he writes about this experience of coming to Tel Aviv. Where? Into Tel Aviv? Why did? So they claim that it was already the destruction of the first temple, not in the second temple, but the first temple. Now, historically, it's very, very difficult to put our finger, but that's their tradition, so we can respect it. There was a time in which they were very rich, the Jews in Yemen, because they were responsible for all the trade in the area. So it was there was a time in which people were attracted there. Also, yeah, in Arab, yeah. You're right, there was more of a farmland, but it was not. It was erected as the first Hebrew city, האוירה העברית הראשונה. So from the beginning, the people that established it wanted to build a city. It was not like Tel Mond, right, that began as a moshava, more really of a farming. So well, he wanted something different, obviously. Otherwise, he would have gone to Tel Mond, for example. In Tel Mond became, I think that the Yemenites that came here came only, it needs to be checked. When exactly did they come here? He wanted a city, obviously. He wanted something different. Again, he wanted also to distance himself a little from the established Yemenite community because he didn't have to understand. Carrying the name. Carrying the name Qafih in the Yemenite community, that's like carrying the name, I don't know, Soloveitchik, right, in other circles. So you cannot just come and be natural. So sometimes if you want to be yourself, and you want to distance yourself from the dispute, you need to take some distance. And I think that's what we was trying to do. But still, Tel Aviv, I think, really had shocked him. So let's see what he writes, what he sees. In source Aleph. בעזרת השם, זכינו לגאולת כל גולת תימן כמעט. So obviously that is a little later, after the establishment of the state, and the big מבצעים of Aliyah in the 50s, and he says, almost all of the Yemenite Jews have came to Eretz Israel, were redeemed. אם אמנם הצד הגשמי בא בדרך כלל על סיפוקו, he says from the financial side, from the physical side, ברוך השם, people are doing fine. Now, in the standards of 2026, maybe we would have looked at the Yemenites coming here and thinking they didn't do so much fine. But for him, he said, we have enough, physically. ויש אף יותר מסיפוקו, and even more than we need. הרי רבות מן התקוות הרוחניות היו למפח נפש. But since we are extremely disappointed from the spiritual side, we hope that we would come to the promised land, to the Holy Land, and we would just raise ourselves in spirituality from what we had in Yemen. We thought that we'd be upgraded, but that's not what happened. כל אותה האוירה של הלמידה והלימוד נגוזה ועברה, ולא נותר ממנה לא מעט ולא הרבה. He said in Yemen there was an atmosphere of learning. Jews knew that the most important thing, the prime thing they do is their connection to Torah and mitzvot. Now they walked, all of them walked, but they knew that what is the central pillar of their life, the focus of their life, is Torah, their connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he said this whole thing completely completely disappeared when they came to Eretz Yisrael. He says it's nothing remained, לא מעט ולא הרבה, not even small. נשארו במחננו רק בבואות וצללים. He says in our camp we see only shadows of what we used to have. Now, it's not 100 years later. It's a few years later. It's the first generation. Now, there is a reason why it happened, and he speaks about it in other occasions. There is a major part to the fact that the Jews coming from Yemen, did not meet modernity till they come to Eretz Israel. So they were not immune. The Jews coming from Europe or even from Northern Africa, they also met modernity in some form or the other. And they already knew that there are different ways how to deal with it. And those that decided to remain Orthodox, to go to the Orthodox or observant, so they came here and knew that they need to keep their observance. But the Jews coming from Yemen didn't even understand that there is such a thing as a non-observant Jew. It didn't exist in Yemen. So coming in, they were just not, they didn't have the tools how to manage this new reality. And even worse, because they came from, in the end, a place that was backwater in technology, in modernity. So just as you had to learn how to use electricity, and just how you had to shed from yourself your old habits of, taking care of the cows, and milking and having chicken in the garden of your house, because now you are in Tel Aviv, or now you are in a modern city. So they also shed Jewish minhagim, Jewish observance, because for the simple people, many times it's all part of your form of life. And when something fall off, the whole thing may fall off. And that's what happened. Now add to that, of course, that the leaders of the young Jewish state, or of the Yishuv Yehudi before the establishment of the state, they saw the Yemenites as people that we need to re-educate. Because they come from, as I said, from a backwater place. So we need to make them into modern human beings. So part of it is their shape, right? Cutting the peot and changing how they look. Part of it is forcing them into a secular education, because we have to educate you. You don't know anything. And that was a great crisis. And it took them a lot of years to come back from this disaster. Now he writes, ברוך השם, בהתאם להבטחתו התעלה, כי לא תשכח מפי זרעו, ברוך השם אנו רואים תהייה להתרחקות, ורבה במחננו ההתקרבות והשיבה אל המקורות מברב ומבעט. It says, ברוך השם, we see in the last years, we see that some of the Jews that made Aliyah, and as I said, went very distant, now they are beginning to get close again. רבים מצעירינו, תודה לאל, חובשי בתי המדרשות בכל חלקי הארץ, or they go to ישיבות, מי לא ירון בראותו ילדיו יוצאי חלציו לימודי השם, ברוך השם, we are happy to see that some of the children are now going to learn Torah. אך פנינה יקרה שהייתה לנו, והיא מסורת הקריאה הנקוטה בידינו מימות עולם משנים קדמוניות, הולכת וכולה נעלמת מן העולם. He says, however, we had our own traditions. And now our young boys, they go to yeshivot, and these may be Sephardic yeshivot or Ashkenazic yeshivot, but they do not learn, they do not teach there. He says, our tradition. We have, for example, our own special accent of how to read. Some of you may have heard the special Yemenite accent. It's very different than the Ashkenazic or the Sephardic one. כולם רואים במדרשי דשא אשר מצאו, ואלה כידוע לא החשיבו מעולם קריאה מדויקת. ואף לא קריאה אחידה. כל אדם מגלגל את המילים אשר לפניו איך שיהיה. He's a little sharp here. He says, you look at the Ashkenazic yeshiva, they don't really educate them how to read properly. Each one is somehow managing something, and if you are able to read the word in a way that resembles what is written, then they give you a pass. But they put no real emphasis on reading properly. Now, he's right. He's right. In Ashkenazi yeshiva, that's not part of the curriculum. If someone is reading in the Torah, then there would be more emphasis on how he reads, although even then, not too much. And for the regular student, he's correct. The emphasis is on the understanding and almost no on the proper reading. לב מי לא יתפלץ בשומעו קריאה מעוותת. He says, our heart is explodes. And when we hear this distorted reading, והרי מבחינה זו דומים אנו לבן יחיד שמת אביו והניח לו ירושה עצמה. He says, we are like a son that his father died, and there is a huge treasure that he inherits. Now, so he should be מברך דיין האמת ושהחיינו בבת אחת. So the halacha is that in such a case he is making the blessing of ברוך דיין האמת for the passing of his father, but also is מברך שהחיינו for the inheritance. Says here, אנו עם שמחתנו הגדולה על ריבוי חובשי בית המדרש. We are doing the ברכה of שהחיינו, that our children are going to yeshivot, but we are doing ברוך דיין האמת, that they go to this Ashkenazic yeshivot and Sephardic yeshivot, and they do not learn how to read properly and how to, not, obviously it's not only the reading, it's all of the minhagim, the Yemenite minhagim. לפני כמה שנים, he tells, so a few years ago, נזדמנתי בשיחה תורנית עם כמה עשרות בחורים ואברכים מבני תימן, הלומדים בישיבות שונות. I had this occasion to speak with a few dozens of Yemenites, boys and אברכים, young men, that were learning in different yeshivot. לאחר השיחה עמדו להתפלל ערבית, so we had a Torah speech, and then we all stood to daven מעריב. והנחתי שתהיה זאת תפילה לפי סדר תימן, נוסח בלדי, או שם, so I assumed, naturally, that all of us here are Yemenites, so obviously we would do according to the Yemenite version. והנה להפתעתי עמד השץ ורק פתח, and then the שליח ציבור stands, and he only says the beginning of the paragraph. That may resemble something to you. So he only begins the paragraph, וכל הקהל עמו יחד, and then the rest of the congregation, אחד מושכנה, אחד מושכנה, זה בקול נמוך, זה בקול רם, זה מקדים, זה מאחר. So he says that then each one is reading according to his own pace. אלא שיש להם תחנות ריכוז. That's a very shame. So he says, but they have resting spaces, stations. So there are stations in which they stop. כאשר המקדימים הגיעו, of course this is a description of an Ashkenazic tefillah, right? And he says, when those that are running fast coming to these stop stations, so they stop, and נחו, they rest, וחיכו לנחשלים, and they wait for those that are slower. כמנהג מקצת העדות אשר אין להם שוטר, this is like those of the communities that have no order. מצער מאוד, he says, it's very sad, שאותם חובשי בית המדרש, אותם שומרי הגחלת, אשר עליהם מוטלת החובה לשמור על הגחלת שלא תכבה. So these are the people that sit in the בית מדרש. These are the keeper of the fire. These are the people that are supposed to save our traditions. לנצור מנהגי אבותינו שלא יטשטשו. דווקא הם פותחים בטשטוש תחילה, so I'm davening with these אברכים who are supposed to be the keepers of tradition, and they daven like some Ashkenazi. ריבון העולמים. מדוע באתנו כל זו? He says, Lord of the universe. Why do we deserve it? אותם מבני עדתנו שעזבו אורחות יושר לצערנו, he says, those that became completely non-observant, so they left the field. אך אלה ההולכים בדרך החיים, בדרך התורה, and those who keep the way of life, the way of Torah and mitzvah, מדוע עוזבים המנהגים המאוששים בדברי תנאים והמוראים, ומאמצים מנהגים אשר אין להם יסוד ובסיס? So I cannot understand. They leave the minhagim that we can show how they have roots in the Gemara. So as I said, the Yemenites Jews for thousands of years, their pride was that they didn't change anything. So their minhagim are completely in accordance or very similar to the minhagim recorded in the Gemara in the Mishnah. While the Ashkenazic minhagim, many times they developed over the time. So how can it be that the Yemenites would leave their good minhagim and follow the less good minhagim of other communities? It should have been the other way around. היש עדה בעולם הקוראת קריאת שמע בקול אחד, בנעימה אחת ובטעם אחד, חוץ מהדת יהודי תימן? היה איפה הוא המנהג התואם להפליא את דברי חז"ל הללו חוץ ממנהג תימן? He says, I cannot understand. There is no other community that has so beautiful minhagim in קריאת שמע, or we saw earlier in reading, as we have. אין זו עדות שאנו ורק אנו החזקנו מנהג קדמונים. So we are the only one that holds to the original custom. We are the followers of the old tradition. Why, he says then, why do we overlook our מקורנו, our origin? That's the other question.
But this just happens naturally because Yemen at that time, it was like 1,000 years ago. Yeah. Yemen as a country didn't change much.
You're right. But he hoped that we would be, the Yemenites, would be able to adapt to the modernity in the technical side, but keep their minhagim in the religion side. That seems to be difficult for many people. So what he decided to do, and that would be one of a few major projects that he would take upon himself, would be to preserve the Yemenite tradition. And that he wrote a book about the customs of Yemenites, a book for which he got the Bialik Prize a few years later, a very important sefer. Now, of course, as you can imagine, the enemies of his family immediately claimed that he only recorded the minhagim that are compatible with his own version, which in the end, it makes sense. That's what he would do. But that was part, so of course, immediately another book was written in order to preserve also the other minhagim. But fine, that's part, I think that he was happy with that. Because that is part of what you hope to do when you write a book. What you hope to do is there would be a reaction, and it would cause, it would be a motive, a trigger for writing other books on the topic. So I don't think that he was opposed to that. Unfortunately, some of the people that opposed him, they tried even to convince the committee that gave him the prize to walk back on the prize, and they said otherwise we'd have demonstrations, etc., etc. Baruch Hashem, in the end, it worked. It didn't fall. So that was one way, meaning one project that he took upon himself. So it was preserving the minhagim. He was teaching Balei Tefillah, the nigunim, the special Yemenite nigunim. He wrote halachot according to the Yemenite tradition. Again, as he understood it, but according to the Yemenite tradition. In the same time, he's working, of course, all the time as a goldsmith. And then but he feels that he does not have the time to learn enough Torah as he would like. And so he enrolls in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav in Yerushalayim. He lives in Tel Aviv. Yeshivat Merkaz Harav is in Yerushalayim. He's still in Tel Aviv. 2 years later, he's still in Tel Aviv. And he begins to make drivings. I mean, he didn't drive, of course, a car, but in buses, I guess, to Yerushalayim, and he would sleep over there for a few days a week, and then return to his home. So he was working and learning. He refused. He was given a stipend from the yeshiva because he was married, he had children. He refused the stipend, and when he had to take it, he wrote it to himself and later paid it back as part of his decision that he would not take money for Torah learning or Torah teaching. By the way, also all of his books, he sold them at the price that it took him to print it and to work on it. So he didn't try to make a living out of these books. He had especially rare manuscripts that he could sell for a lot of money. All of them he gave to the National Library in order to make photocopies when back then they had microfilm. Yeah, they had microfilm. I guess many of you still had the chance to use these machines. So to use microfilms. So of course, by giving it to them, he lost a major source of income that he could have by selling these manuscripts. But for him, what was most important was just the ability to spread Torah. What much more important than, and he didn't want to make money out of it. So he was landing in Merkaz Arav by Rav Harlap. He very much admired Rav Tzvi Yehuda, about whom we spoke a few weeks ago, although he came from a very different environment, so it's very interesting. But nonetheless, when he saw greatness of Torah, then he was very receptive. And also, they understood that it's not only a student coming to them. He was already a grown rabbi, and a very serious Talmid Chacham. So when they began a Kolel Dayanut, to become a rabbinical judge, it's called a Dayan, in Merkaz Arav, he was the first one to be chosen into this Kolel. And a few years later, he really got his smicha for Dayanut. Yes. That's right. That's right. But they didn't agree. It's very interesting because Rav Qafih, as you may remember, thought that the Zohar is a later writing. And Rav Kook believed that the Zohar was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And they had a very respectful, but still a very strong disagreement about that. But nonetheless, as great people can, even when they have a disagreement, they can still respect each other and learn from each other. And it should have been simple. And it is said that we mention it like that's something that only kept to great people. But unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. So yes, you're right. They were corresponding. There were many disputes, but he was happy to learn there, and they were happy to have him there. In 1946, they moved to Yerushalayim, to Nachlaot, where he would stay for the rest of his life. In 1948, of course, Milchemet HaShichur, Independence War, he is being recruited to what was called back then Mishmar Ha'am, part of the Haganah, and he served there. And he was also, while there was the siege, the Matzor, on Yerushalayim, so he would go around in the forest around Yerushalayim, and from Yemen, from his grandfather, he knew very well about the different vegetables and what you can eat, mushrooms, and what you can eat and what not. So he was teaching the Yerushalmim what they can eat by the knowledge that he got from his grandfather, which is a very interesting fact. Immediately after the war, he's given his smicha, as I said, as a dayan. And then in 1950, he is appointed to be a dayan in Tel Aviv. So now he lives in Yerushalayim and he has to make the journeys to Tel Aviv. That's how things are. But that doesn't hold for long, because again, in Tel Aviv, there are a few Yemenite families that are not happy with his appointment to the Beit Din. Unfortunately, they carried this hatred with them from Yemen to here. And he didn't want to be part of the dispute, so he is asking to be transferred, and he's transferred to Yerushalayim, which is, by the way, better, I guess, for all sides involved. And he becomes a dayan in the Beit Din, first in the low Beit Din in Yerushalayim, and later would be appointed to the Beit Din Hagadol, to the Great Rabbinical Assembly in Yerushalayim. He also had a shul that he was the Rav of. All of that, as I said, without taking money for these activities. So he had a shul that he was the rabbi of. For this shul, again, I would describe you now what his granddaughter writes about him, which is amazing. All of his days, he would wake up to shul before 4 o'clock. No, 4 is not 4 p.m., right? It's 4 a.m., and he would be there and give shiurim, and the other people would wake up, I guess, and come to the shiurim. And then when he went back from the morning tefillah, so around 9 a.m., so from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m., he's in the shul teaching and davening. Then he would go to his work in the Beit Din, in the court, in the rabbinical court, and that would be till, I guess, afternoon hours. Then when he finished, he went to his working room. חדר העבודה. He never slept during the day. And the little hours that he did sleep where he tried to have them at the beginning of the night. So you'd go to sleep, let's say, between 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And then he would wake up and begin his day. Why did he prefer to sleep at the beginning of the night? Because he said the most productive hours that I can have, that people do not come in, are in this second half of the night. So from 1 or 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., when he began to give the shiurim in shul, that is when no one interrupts him and he's able just to sit and write his sfarim. Now he would sit, the way that he sat, he would sit yeshiva mizrachit. How do you say yeshiva mizrachit? With his legs crossed, like they sat in Yemen. So he would sit he had a very simple wooden table, just as he had in Yemen, and he would sit with his legs crossed as in Yemen, and that's the way that he walked. And they said that he was able to sit like that for hours and just focus on what he is doing. He said that's the way that our forefathers sat, and that way he can focus properly. I sit like that for 5 minutes. Yeah, it's when you eat healthy and you live healthy, then you're healthy. In 1957, he begins to work on the translations project. So I spoke earlier about the first project, which was the preserving of the Yemenite minhagim. The second project, which has much to do with the first one, is the translation of the works that were written in Arabic. So we know that many of the sages of the Chachamim that wrote during the medievals in the Sephardic world, such as Maimonides Rambam, such as Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, and many others, wrote in Arabic. And this was, when they wrote it in Arabic, it was because many of the Jews in the Sephardic lands were reading Arabic better than they read Hebrew. However, times changed, and now Arabic is unknown to the vast majority of the Jewish people, and these works were non-accessible. Some of them were translated in the medieval times, but to Hebrew that was not modern, and also not as exact as he thought that the translations should be. So he took upon himself to translate. He translated, I think, 70 books, including all of the major works that were done in Arabic. So we speak about the Guide of the Perplexed by Rambam, Mori Nevuchim, the Sefer HaMitzvot by the Rambam, all of the Peirush Mishnah, the commentary on the Mishnah by the Rambam. We speak about the Kuzari. We speak about Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, his Emunot Vedeot, his book about faith and beliefs, and his Peirush on the Torah. Just now, by the way, last year, not last year, a few months ago, they published a whole new manuscript they were able to find in the Gniza of Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon on Vayikra. Unfortunately, of course, we couldn't have Rav Qafih to do that, but they were using the same methods. I mean, he also, we can say, he invented the principles of the new translations. So many of the works that are being done now, even if they improve Rav Qafih's work, such as the work by Rav Shilat and others who retranslate some of Rambam or the Kuzari works, but they work with these manuscripts and with the ideas that Rav Qafih had instated. So, for example, he said, I am not working from the print. Because when he was with his grandfather taught him how to read manuscripts. Now, most of the Rabbanim, usually reading from manuscripts in the last 400 years, that's something that only researchers can, only scientists can do. Rabbanim, this ability fell by the side, mainly. It's not simple to read a manuscript. Everyone here that was a teacher knows that it's not simple to read a manuscript, something that was handwritten. But when you speak about manuscripts that were written 400 or 500 or 600 years ago, we speak about a font that is not necessarily similar to the way that we write now. We speak about pages that are very old, and it's very difficult. The reading is very difficult. And he would sit for hours on end. And he had special rare manuscripts that he brought with him from Yemen. And he said, I cannot begin to translate before I first decide what is the right version. And he gave many examples in which just by deciding the right version, he said about the Rambam, about Maimonides, there is a whole cottage industry, you may say, of contradictions in Rambam and the way to solve them. And he said, sometimes you can erase whole books just by showing that the question, the contradiction begins from a wrong variant of the text. And if you correct it, then you don't need the questions, and not the answers, and the questions on the answers, and the whole thing just is unnecessary. Yeah, and there is more than once that he had done that. Now again, some Rabbanim or some Talmidei Yeshiva do not see that as greatness, because they say greatness is the ability to think and to squeeze your finger. But Rav Kapach said, I am going for the truth. And truth he equates with originality, meaning to say not originality to be original yourself, but with the origin. So you can see why it is similar to his first project of preserving the Yemenite minhagim. Because he said, we are looking for the past in order to know what to do in the present and in the future. So we need to have the best version of the past in order to continue. So that's what he dedicated his life to. And we use his works in a vast majority of works. As I said, the commentary on the Mishnah. We use the Rav Kapach edition. Mori Nevuchim, Guide for the Perfect. There are other editions, also good. But his edition is very basic and very excellent. And other Sfarim, we use his editions because they are the best ones to be found, both from the text side and from the translation side. Now, because he wanted it to be as good as he could, he insisted, sometimes the publishing houses were not happy with that, but he insisted that in his translated works, in his translated editions, there would always be the original text and then his translation. So people would be able to compare, and if they disagree, they would be able to disagree. He didn't say, I'm the last final word. He wanted people to be able to know. The publishing house said, you are doubling the size of the books. 95% of the people are unable to read the Arabic as it is, so it is unnecessary. Now, he argued with them. Sometimes he won, sometimes they won. At a certain point, he began to publish independently because it was important for him that it would stand up to the standards that he thought are correct, and he was not happy with other people interfering with what he thought is the right way to do things. In 1963, he publishes his translation of the Perush HaMishnah, as I said. In 1969, he gets the Israel Prize for Jewish Sciences. In 1972, he publishes his translation to the Mori Nevuchim, and then he begins to work on his magnum opus. All the time, as I said, he's a Dayan in the Beit Din HaGadol, and he's working and he's publishing very important psikot. He obviously follows Rambam in most of his psikot. That's fine. That was his card. So he would follow Rambam many times. He sat with Rav Ovadia Yosef in many of the sittings. And Rav Ovadia Yosef gave a beautiful hesped on him later, and also came to many of the yortzites. I'm sure that in Yemen they don't say yortzites, but he came to many of these ear days, and he would give eulogies. And he said that he loved him so much because they had very different opinions regarding many things. But he was so quiet and so subtle, and he ran away from disputes. And he would state his mind, he would stand behind it, he would give the arguments, but everything was always done so respectfully. And that's something that is, again, is very special, because you have many people that are great geniuses, but many times they would have very strong personalities, which not always be easy to speak with. The people that are used to be right, because they are usually right, but they sometimes develop this habit that if I was right in 90% of the time, then I am right in 100% of the time. And there are only few people that are able to escape this temptation. And Rav Kapach was one of these people that was able to re-listen, to reevaluate his position. He changed his mind regarding different things. but all of the same time, he also was very, held very strongly to his convictions about, as I said, the Yemenite tradition and about Rambam and about how we should conduct ourselves. In 1984, he begins his magnum opus, which is his commentary on Mishneh Torah, on the Rambam. And in this commentary, what he did was he intended to read 400 commentaries, 400 pirushim on the Rambam, and integrate them into one sefer, and also give his own bottom line on every halacha that is in discussion. However, he was only able, if I remember correctly, to do 325 because he was already beginning to become old. But that begins in 1948. In 1984. In 1988, he retires from the Beit Gadol in order to completely devote himself to this project of writing his commentary on the Mishneh Torah. We don't have it here, unfortunately. I think we don't. It's maybe maybe some of you saw it. It's a red. It's very bright red. It has a very bright red cover, and it's 24 volumes on the Mishneh Torah. Very thick, very heavy. And you read every halacha. As I said, he integrates all of these pirushim. You have to go now, and he rejects many of them. He's looking for the truth, and he would read, and he's not interested, as I said, in pilpulim and in chilukim and in things that, for example, that's the way that I learned in a more of an Ashkenazi yeshiva, you may say, more of a Litvish yeshiva. That's the way I teach. So when I teach Rambam, I am not necessarily now beginning to search in all of the manuscripts, in all of the letters that the Rambam wrote, in order to have a better understanding of what the Rambam originally meant. What I am learning is the text as I have it, and as it was learned later during the generations. And for me, that is the chain of Torah. But for Rav Kapach, he wanted to, as I said, to return to the origin. So he was trying to uncover Rambam's original intent. And he's going perush by perush by perush, says that seems correct because of that, but it is incorrect because of that. And finally, he gives his own bottom line. Sometimes he wrote more harshly regarding some of the commentaries. Sometimes just write a commentary and then write a question mark after the commentary in the barracks. And you'd understand that that's not even something that he wants to argue with, because he thinks that it's so far away from the truth. Now, that's very interesting, because I said he was a very peaceful man. But this commentary had caused some, from the more right-wing side, you may say, to oppose him, because they saw it as disrespect when he would quote Reb Chaim of Brisk, or someone that is very high regarded, and just put a question mark after his perush. Then some saw it as disrespectful, and as a consequence, very interesting, when Shabtai Frenkel, this is the famous Frenkel edition of the Rambam. So what they did was they worked on the Rambam and manuscripts, etc., and also they have there something which is called Sefer HaMafteach. It's the key book. What they do there, so they also looked at, 800 commentary books on the Rambam. It's not only work of one man. The Frenkel edition is the work of a whole staff, a whole Beit Midrash. And they would write to you, on this halacha in the Rambam, there is this question. Go to that sefer, go to that sefer, go to that sefer. They completely ignore all the works of Rav Kapach. Although he may be the most expert on Rambam in the last 300 years, they completely ignore his work, because the way they see it, he had offended the honor, the kavod of some of the achronim. So, as I said, that's very sad that these things happen. But we also have to acknowledge when they happen, and it's important, because after it was understood that they ignore him, they censor him, then there was a whole new edition that was put out with the censored pirushim. As you can imagine, they also ignored Rav Kook pirushim on the Rambam, and there is a lot to speak about this edition as well. In 1997, he finishes these 24 volumes of the Mishneh Torah. By the way, it's not an easy reading. It's not an easy. He has other things that he wrote that are beautiful, as descriptions of what happened in Yemen, things that are very accessible. But his commentary on the Rambam, you have to see it and learn slowly. It's a project. It's really a project. He got a doctorate, an honorary doctorate from Bar Ilan University after publishing this 24 volumes of Mishnah Torah. And then he lived for another 3 years. He was already weak and old, but he said, I must print the rest of the manuscripts that I hold and to translate them, because I don't know if there is anyone that would be able to do that and that would be interested in doing that after I pass away. So his last 3 years, he sat again, putting hours on hours on the editing and translating of a few more books, a little less important, we would say, from the books that he worked on in the first era, but still gifts that remained after him. And there is a letter here that he wrote in 1980 that's in source Gimel. However, we are already beyond our time. So you just say that this is a letter that he wrote for Tzom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz that we would commemorate this week. And he says that the Tzom is not about not eating. The Tzom is about tshuva. And tshuva is not about the tshuva about our forefathers did. That's very easy, right? To hit on their own chest. Tshuva should always be for our own sins. And the problem is that we are still, he writes that, we are still immersed in the sins of baseless hatred that our forefathers have been. And he says, what about the machlokot? How can it be that observant people, that religious people are fighting each other? He says, if someone that is non-religious is reading what some of observant leaders, I don't even know to say rabbis, but they write about each other, then he immediately says, okay, so I believe both of them, so I want to have no connection with each of them, right? For either of them. That's and obviously it's very hard and he suffered a lot from these disputations throughout all of his life. And he writes from the bottom of his heart this letter about the tshuva that we all need to do, the way that we relate to each other. And even if there are machlokot are fine, are good, but only when they are being done l'shem shamayim, with respect. He was niftar in Motzei Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. So during Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, he gave a shiur in the shul the day before Yud Zayin Tammuz, and he told them that's the last shiur. They thought it's the last shiur because of the fast day. But obviously he meant it's the last shiur. On the morning of the first day, he called his wife. He told her that he's not feeling so well, so he would not go to shul today. She tried to convince him to eat or to get a doctor. He said it doesn't matter. That's the end is coming. So there is no reason why to eat. It's chaval. It's a fast day today, and it will not help anyway. And throughout this, she writes, the granddaughter writes, that throughout the first day just sat down and learned, and they say that he looked like an angel. He was beaming with happiness, and he sat down to his night session. His wife already went to sleep, but she woke up for some reason in 3 a.m. Maybe she also would rise in these type of hours. And she saw him on the floor, lying on the floor, and he was niftar at the age of 82, but with a lot of treasure that he left us, with a lot of legacy, also with students. To this day, maybe you've heard about Rav Ratzon Arusi from Kiryat Ono and other very important Yemenite rabbis that are leaders of their communities and givers of Torah. Teachers of Torah to this very day. And I think he's a very special person. As I said, he left a lot of bracha, a lot of blessing behind him. We use it to this day, and it should be used, I think, for many, many, many long years. And he is someone also that we can learn from how he was able, while holding to a very unique position of Rambam and Yemenite Jews, etc., but with being respectful to every person and running away from machlokot that only cause hatred and destruction. And with that, we are preparing ourselves to Tzom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz this Thursday. Now, usually during the 3 weeks, we are taking a break in our shiurim from our run-of-the-mill of the great rabbis, and we are taking some topic that is more relevant to the Shlosht HaShavuot, and I hope to do that as well this year. So in Mirza Hashem, I would give you more information about next year, Bezat Hashem, as you would come close. Thank you so much.
Thank you.